I'm Hilary. I'm an engineer, and I'm here to tell you about, how to keep an airplane in the air as long as possible. So I design aircraft that, you hope can fly forever, but in practical terms, I try to make them fly for as long as possible. And now, I'm not really talking about conventional passenger aircraft. I can't imagine that there's very many of you who want to sit on an EasyJet or Ryanair flight for days at a time. The type of aircraft that I work on looks a bit more like this. So they're solar powered, and the aim is to keep them airborne for as long as possible. And you can kind of see the different ones up there. If you look at the top right-hand corner, that's a kind of hand-launched size thing. So it's about 6-meter span. So if I'm standing, let's say, aligned with that, it's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's from about there to there. So they're quite sort of long, but very, very thin, and that's the top right-hand one. And then they range in size to things in the top left-hand corner, which is closer to 25-meter span. So think sort of that short-haul flight that you would get on with Ryanair, about the same tip-to-tip length. Would be the same as the top left-hand one. The bottom two are actually 70 to 80 meters in span. So take that same aircraft that I talked, the short-haul flight somewhere in Europe, and you take 3 of them, line them up tip-to-tip, and that's about the length that you have tip-to-tip of one of the bottom 2 images. So today I want to talk to you about, solar aircraft, why I find them fascinating, what they might do for the world, and some of the challenges associated with building one. So, one of the first questions is why? Why would you want to build something that flies for a very, very long time? And there are actually a number of companies that are putting money into this and have either tried and failed or are still trying to put things up for a very long time. And they include the likes of Airbus, Boeing, Google, Facebook, Ordnance Survey, BAE Systems. Lots of them have sort of tried or are trying to build these things that fly for a very, very long time. And the use case they sort of foresee are things that kind of bridge the gap between what you might do with a conventional aircraft and satellites. So with a conventional aircraft, you can follow a path that you want to follow. You could circle over a location that you want to see something at. Compared to a satellite, you can land it and take it off again, and you could change the camera or the sensor or the thing that you're carrying on the aircraft. But they're slightly more similar to a satellite in that you can fly for a very long time. So you could stay over a location and monitor, or you could provide a service in a location over sort of days, weeks, months, years. Right? So that's what all of these people are sort of chasing. So sort of some examples would be, you could carry a camera, and you could monitor and track wildfires. You could use it for surveying and mapping roads, urban infrastructure, etc. Maybe you want to provide information and sort of live information over some kind of natural disaster. So you could stay over that area and sort of help with the response and the recovery of that area. Maybe it could carry a sensor for atmospheric sampling. So maybe you're sort of tracking pollution over an area to try to improve it. Maybe you're collecting some other kind of data for better weather and climate change forecasting. Or you could use it for connectivity. So that's bringing internet to people. And some of you may have heard of the project Google Loon. It was one of these high-altitude, long-endurance projects. It was with free-floating balloons, and their idea was to bring internet to billions of people who don't have internet, right? We could have taken it to granted with our phone, but lots of people don't have that access, so they tried to do it with this network of free-floating balloons. It ended as a project, but it sort of shows the impact that some of this technology can have, that you could bring internet to a large population that doesn't have reliable access once these technologies mature. So, going to the kind of concept of the solar aircraft and why it would be useful to fly for a very long time. So the basic idea is, sun rises, sun sets. So what we do is we have the sun, it rises, we fly with the power that it's providing, but we also take some of that surplus and we store it. Then the night comes, we have that surplus energy stored in batteries. We discharge those batteries throughout the night to keep us flying, and then the sun rises again, and you repeat that cycle, right? Sun rises, sun sets, you collect that energy, you discharge that energy. That's sort of the overall idea. So current records for these sort of very long-endurance solar-powered aircraft take place at really high altitude because above the clouds, the sun is always shining. So how long is long? Well, I want to go through a few of the previous records. So some of you may have been familiar with solar impulse. It wasn't too long ago, but it's one of the records for longest piloted flight of a solar aircraft. And it was in 2015 that solar impulse was piloted and flew from Japan to Hawaii in one go over 4 days as part of solar impulse's journey to circumnavigate the globe. For conventional air fuel, so hydrocarbon fuel that you would put in something, and an unpiloted one, the record was actually really recent. It was 2021, and it flew for 8 days, and it's something called vanilla unmanned. For the actual all-time record of a conventional aviation fuel flight, it was something, and it's kind of surprising that it was back in 1986, and it was something called the Rutan Voyager. It's the middle picture, the slightly obscure-looking aircraft, and it flew for 9 days straight and circumnavigated the globe without refueling or stopping that entire journey. Then on to solar aircraft. So we had sort of 9 days, and then in 2010, this is the first unmanned solar aircraft, and it was Kinetic's Zephyr, and it flew for 14 days. After that, Zephyr was bought by Airbus. And in 2018, that record almost doubled, so Zephyr flew for 25 days straight. Now, some of you may have followed in the news because it was fairly recent, but it was only about 1.5 months ago that that record was broken again by Zephyr. But it was 25 days, and in August, so when you were on your summer holidays of this year, Zephyr flew for 64 days straight, so 2 months. And it was sort of a bit sad because it was really, really close to breaking the all-time endurance record, which includes refueling. And it was only short by 4 hours. And it was a bit sad because it flew for 64 days, and then a lot of the media attention was that it was short by 4 hours, which I'll add to and tell you about what the 4 hours was, because it's kind of a slightly crazy piloted flight in 1959, flown by a Cessna, and they did ground-to-air refueling. So a little bit unfair because you are refueling, but pilots sat up there in an aircraft for 64 days. Why would you do this? Well, of course, for a Las Vegas hotel to generate publicity. So unfortunately, Airbus was only 4 hours short of breaking this all-time record, but still an incredibly cool record to break, right? And to double the previous non-refueled flight from 24 days up to 64, so more than double. And it's really fascinating that these are records that are being broken in our lifetime. And they are going to be continued to be broken in the next few years as all of these different companies chase these sort of endurance records, because the technology is they can see a commercial route to why it might be useful. So I'm an engineer, and I think I'm going to be the first speaker to show you some equations and a plot. Don't be scared. But let's kind of go back to why this is challenging, what makes it sort of interesting, why it's hard, what do we have to do as engineers. So going back to this, we have to do this: fly, charge, fly, discharge, repeat, right? So we need to do that cycle. And if we look at the power of what that looks like throughout the day, it looks something like this. So on the left-hand side, or the y-axis, I have power and then time. So taking you through this, we start at sunrise, it goes up, sun rises. This is a cloudless day, or we're very high altitude, no complications. We get to some peak midday, and then, we start to get less sun throughout the day. The sun sets, it goes back to 0, and then we have 0 power throughout the night. Right, so that's sort of the solar side. Well, if you have an aircraft that you're trying to keep flying, then you have, let's just assume it's constant speed, it's constant power, so it's just flying the whole time, just constant. So we just have a constant power line. Night or day, we just keep it the same. Now, for those of you who remember your physics, if you take the area under a power versus time graph, you get energy. And for these multiple day flights, we need to close that energy balance, right? The surplus energy that we have from the solar has to be equal to the energy that we have stored during the night flight. So the area shown in green here, which is below the solar, but above the power that you need to fly, is our surplus energy. And that needs to be equal to the energy that we need at night. So the area that's below our power required to fly, and then above the solar, which at night the solar is pretty much zero. Now, that nighttime energy needs to be stored in batteries. And one of the big challenges of solar aircraft, and really, electrifying aircraft in general, is batteries and mass. So, historically, we've designed around aviation fuel. Lovely stuff, some issues, the CO2, but this is energy density. So energy density is how much energy we have in 1 kilogram of that fuel. So for aviation, you want things to be light, so you want this number to be really, 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 really big. And aviation fuel is about 12,500 watt-hours per kilogram. Now, if we look at batteries, they look like this. So this is our lithium-ion batteries. So now we have a problem where we're designing around this. It's about 250 watt-hours per kilogram. So in terms of closing that energy cycle, one of the problems is that mass can spiral out of control because batteries are heavy, so they weigh a lot, so then you need more power, so then you need more batteries, so then you need more power, so then you need more batteries, etc. And it all just spirals out of control, and you can't close that energy loop to fly for multiple days at a time. So how do we decrease that power to fly? Well, another equation, boo. It's to reduce mass. So like we said with the batteries, if there was a step change in battery technology, then yeah, we would be able to do completely new and novel things, and really, it would get very exciting. And it already is very exciting. But right now, in the meantime, we sort of have to design around the bits we can. So these aircraft are extremely lightweight. Think sort of carbon fiber, foam, films, and optimizing every gram out of the aircraft that you can to really get that mass down. And for interest, it goes as the power of 1.5 to the mass. To put that into sort of more contextual terms, if you're not an equations person, there's a solar aircraft on the left-hand side, and that same Boeing on the left or right that you might be familiar with, and they have the same tip-to-tip span. And the solar aircraft, and this is the Zephyr, weighs about 75 kilograms, which is kind of like the average person. So that whole thing weighs about the same as you or me. The Boeing on the right weighs about 78,000 kilograms. So, I have my one little person, and it weighs about 1,000 people in sort of order to. Those things are really, really, really light, these solar aircraft. The next way to decrease power is speed. So here, it's a cubed relation in a more kind of quantifiable term. If you've all been cycling, probably, you know that feeling that if you cycle into a headwind, even a little bit of wind, it just makes it harder and harder and harder, and that's because of this cubed relation. A little bit of wind still means a lot more power that you have to put in to that headwind. So solar aircraft tend to go very slow. So a solar aircraft is about 45 miles per hour, so that's below motorway sort of speeds, whereas the airliner that you would fly on is around 520 miles per hour. So, they fly very slowly. That's another way that we decrease that power. The last one is drag. And the kind of drag that I'm going to talk about is some specific one called lift-induced drag. And I have this formula, and it looks maybe a little bit complicated, but the term I want to focus on is that AR, which stands for aspect ratio, which is how long the thing is, the wings are, to how wide the wings are. You want that number, or you want the drag to be low, so you want aspect ratio to be big. So on the left-hand side, we have something low aspect ratio, which means we'll have a higher drag on that of this kind of drag, because we have sort of short and stubby wings. Whereas on the right-hand side, we have something that's very high aspect ratio. So if you have very, very long, slender wings, you decrease that type of drag, which is why a lot of these solar aircraft, they all kind of look like uncooked pieces of spaghetti, right? They're all very, very skinny and very, very narrow wings, because they're trying to decrease that drag. Now, I wanted to have some kind of demo, because I'm an engineer, and demos are always dangerous live, but I wanted to show something where we really, really optimize that kind of mass and speed, but fits in a little feeder, and I could show you. So I brought along the image, and I brought along the actual thing, but the image so you can see it, because it's quite small, and it's a little glider, and it's called a walk-along glider. So it's very, very light, and it flies very, very slow. I'll go and get it, and I also have a very highly engineered piece of cardboard. So it might be a bit hard to see, which is why I have the image up there, but it looks something like this. So I think it's quite cute. It's quite graceful. It's nothing more than, the white bobbly kind of packaging that you get. It's that. So it's made of that kind of foam. If you might not be able to see, maybe the people in the front, you can see there's little holes. It's just that white bobbly foam cut very, very thin, cut in a sort of specific shape and with a few kind of critical folds. And then also it has a little wire at the front that brings the center of mass in the right spot. Now, usually for demos, you'd want like a big bang and then you'd all applaud and it would be great. I think this one's a lot more graceful. So I'll go for oohing and awing if it works. You can ooh and awe at the kind of more graceful beauty of it. So if I just drop it, it should sort of, it just wafts along, but you can see it's descending. But it's called a walk-along glider, because I should be, just with my calibrated piece of cardboard, I can provide a little bit of power so I can keep it straight and level, because I don't need to provide much because it's so low power, because it's so lightweight, and so see, I can kind of, just with a bit of an updraft, because it's so lightweight, I can kind of walk it along and keep it in a level flight and keep it going along. So that's where the oohing and awing comes in. So that's kind of the trying to bring into that like the beauty of some of these aerodynamic principles of kind of really optimizing this one mass and a slow speed. It doesn't have a huge aspect ratio, but is sort of where I want to end on. So I'll do it again because it's such a lovely demo, and then maybe Herb can come in to massive applause, and maybe we'll try to do a circle around him or something as it sort of wafts along. And that'll be the end of my talk. I hope you found it interesting. No.
Sorry.
No circle.
My fault. My fault. Obviously have some sort of negative force against that. But, I was thinking actually, if they ever make Forrest Gump, like that would be he'd be doing crossing the country with his little plane the entire. Sorry. That was really cool. Thank you so much. Just one really, and I realize the research you're doing and what I'm about to ask you about is not necessarily directly connected, but you mentioned Project Loon, and I think the reason is that, at the time, there was a huge amount of hype about it going to provide internet connectivity for the next billion, or even the last billion, right? This idea, and obviously it didn't quite happen. And it from what I read, technical difficulties prevent. Do you have any insight as to what those technical difficulties were?
I think on my perspective, it would be it's only going to be my opinion. I didn't work for Google, so I don't know all the inside info.
Yeah.
But my assessment, from some of the trials they ran, I would say the technical difficulties were not that big, and that they did do some really impressive demos. So they would go up in altitude and down in altitude, and they'd follow the wind patterns, and they could actually stay on station. I don't know if any of you nerds watch Flight Radar 24. You can track planes live. You could track these Google balloons live and see what they were doing. I think it came more to commercial case,
Right.
is sort of some of my understanding. But they're still going. So I think a lot of the technology that they have developed, they're actually still, they've closed the balloon bit, but they're still using the technology for some of the other companies that are chasing the high altitude technology, be it via solar airplane, or some people are trying to do it with blimps, so like airships. So I think not all of it is lost, but I think it comes down to commercial case and how much you can charge and how much it costs, and then again,
Mundane
just
stuff then, yeah.
maturity of the technology. So I think there's going to be iterations.
And just one last quick question. What's the next big milestone for this area of research? What's the next big record, I guess, that people are shooting for?
Yeah, well, I mean, one that I would find quite fascinating. So 64 days is quite impressive. It does depend what time of year and where you're flying. I think if someone reached like a year, that would be quite impressive, because that does mean you've gone through the seasonality of summer, winter, so short days and long days, unless you're at the equator. But I think a year would be a pretty impressive feat. Also, so the battery technology is an interesting one for the nerds, but there's the energy density, and it happens to go down with cycle life. So you also have this more challenging problem that if you fly, the longer you fly, the more worn out your batteries get. So they're getting worse with time as well, which makes it a big challenge as well.
Hilary, thank you so much.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.